Welcome to the Vault. Happy Hump Day. This live stream is pertaining to Bryan Kohberger, who is a suspect in the Idaho 4 student slayings out in Moscow, Idaho. I will be discussing DNA, ancestral DNA, how it was linked, his DNA was linked through relatives to get a match at the crime scene. I will also be discussing the gag order that has been rendered in this case. And I also want to talk about his plan. I will bring you information pertaining to the VIN number of the car being ran, linking him to the said Elantra, registering his car in Pullman, Washington, 5 days after committing the crime on King Road, and then sitting in that same town a month later. What was the objective after killing the kids? The father has been brought into the situation, is flying out to meet the son, allegedly to take a road trip back home. But that information has been noted that it was the middle of December when the father touched down in Washington, 1 month after the murders. So it wasn't immediately that the father allegedly went to Washington, as far as we know. But as I said, I need a receipt to when the father actually touched down in Washington. But he alleges that it was a pre-planned event to fly out there and then drive back with his son. Body footage has been released of a state trooper pulling over the said Kohberger and the father in the state of Indiana. He was pulled over 2 times, given a warning first about speeding and also trailing a truck too closely. What was his plan? Because when you learn that he registered his car in the state of Washington after killing the kids 5 days later, it goes to show that possibly he had no intention of leaving Washington. Because why would you register your car knowing you just murdered the kids? Is it because he thought he had gotten away with the crime? November 18th, he registers his car in the state of Washington. So that shows he was cocky in his decision to linger on at Washington State University. And he stayed behind to finish his coursework for his first semester as a PhD student. He thought he had gotten away with it, obviously, because I don't think he would have registered his car had he thought he was on the radar. So that's November 18th. December 15th, we get the footage of him being on the interstate with his father in December. So that's a month later. So he stayed behind, killing these kids on the 13th of November, allegedly, registering his car 5 days later on November 18th. And a month later, we get body cam footage of the 15th of December. He and his father in a car traveling in the state of Indiana. Shows that he was cocky. But what was the plan going back to Pennsylvania? Was it actually for Christmas? Or did he get scared? Wanted to take the car out of sight? But then one could say it won't matter because you registered the car in the state of Washington. Your name would come up anyway in the 22,000 search of Hyundai Elantras, white Hyundai Elantras. You're going to be in the database regardless. If you stayed in Washington, left. What was the plan in going back to Pennsylvania? Was it for a visit? or to stay, or to ditch the car. But the one thing that's strange, if you want to think that he was going to go and never come back, he didn't pack up his apartment. His belongings were left behind. And naturally, if you were going to leave, you wouldn't leave evidence to link you to 1122 King Road or any type of affiliation, messaging to any of the girls. You would destroy that computer or you have taken it with you. So what was the plan? Very interesting information. What is this ancestral DNA about? They'll extract your DNA from the cells in your saliva and then look at what's in your DNA at hundreds of thousands of places. Once they have the DNA code at these locations, they can compare your DNA to a database of thousands of other people whose ancestry is known. Then they'll see which group your DNA matches. This was uploaded July 9th, 2018. How accurate is the DNA test from Ancestry? 99% accuracy of reading. Accuracy is very high when it comes to reading each of the hundreds of thousands of positions or markers in your DNA. With current technology, Ancestry DNA has on average an accuracy rate of over 99% for each marker tested. Can Ancestry DNA be used against you? Very interesting. Your genetic information could also potentially be used against you in a court case. If you were to seek damages for a work-related injury, for example, a firm might try to use information from your genome to point to other potential causes for your symptoms. Does Ancestry DNA show both mother and father? Unlike the Y chromosome or mitochondrial DNA test, Ancestry DNA uses an autosomal DNA test that surveys a person's entire genome at over 700,000 locations. It covers both the maternal and paternal sides of the family tree, so it covers all lineages. What are the cons of Ancestry DNA? Ancestry DNA results do not include access to historical records. This costs extra. Subscription packages to historical records service are not cheap. Health testing is much less robust compared to other companies. Users looking for health testing can find better options elsewhere. Does the FBI have access to Ancestry DNA? To provide our users with the greatest protection under the law, we require all government agencies seeking access to Ancestry customers' data to follow valid legal process and do not allow law enforcement to use Ancestry services to investigate crimes or to identify human remains. Very interesting. So, they have to follow a valid legal process, which means they'd have to show a warrant to obtain any type of ancestral DNA. And they do not allow the use of the services to investigate crimes, it says, or to identify human remains. Well, then I guess that doesn't apply to this case because this is an open investigation, and allegedly that is how his DNA came to fruition. It's through ancestors. And then naturally, they tested his own DNA, and it was linked to the crime scene of the Idaho students. Very interesting. Does the government know my DNA? Those fingerprints are then checked through the FBI's Criminal Justice Information Services, CJIS. The CJIS is the FBI's home to biometrics, DNA, and other criminal information. Fingerprints help the government verify security clearance applicants' criminal background. Can I ask Ancestry to destroy my DNA? You can request that we delete your data and destroy your physical sample at any time, and we will do so. Because genetic information is potentially useful to help cure disease, extend life, and improve science, we ask if you want to take part in research that may be conducted by third parties. Do you legally own your DNA? Myriad Genetics, Inc., the Supreme Court of the United States, ruled that human genes cannot be patented in the U.S. because DNA is a product of nature. The court decided that because nothing new is created when discovering a gene, there's no intellectual property to protect, so patents cannot be granted. Information, July 28, 2021. Can I hide myself on Ancestry? If you'd like to receive an ethnicity estimate without being listed as a match to potential relatives, you can choose not to see your DNA matches or be listed as their match. The option to hide DNA matches provides you with more control over your own data and privacy. April 4th, 2022. Can DNA come out wrong? Yes, a paternity test can be wrong. As with all tests, there's always the chance that you receive incorrect results. No test is 100% accurate. Human error and other factors can cause results to be wrong. I brought you this information because there are some people, possibly Bryan's family, using the word, it's funny to me, erroneous assumptions. There's no assumption in DNA. The only way they can get the DNA wrong is if there was contamination done at the lab. And I would assume they would exhaust all measures to make sure when they finally got his DNA by the ancestral report and individually from him, because they tracked him allegedly cross country. So that means they got his DNA some type of way, possibly from a cigarette, a cup, a straw. It was a hit. And then you have to think about the fact that your DNA is unique on its own. So even if, let's say, you want to hypothesize, allegedly, they made a mistake on the ancestral side, they still took another swab of the suspect's DNA, and it still would have matched any DNA at the crime scene. Thank you for joining me. And a gag order has been issued in this case. I think we all knew that was coming. I'm going to bring you said information pertaining to the gag order. Also, an associate professor by the name of Michelle Bozier of DeSales University has spoken out pertaining to Mr. Bryan, that he was a brilliant student. Please check out my upload in the YouTube queue for that said upload pertaining to her commentary. She's a young associate professor at DeSales, and she has now decided to come forward to speak about her brief dealings with him. She never met him personally. It was an online course, and she was his associate professor. Very interesting information. One second. Hope you all are well out there. Happy New Year. This next source is by KTVB7 News. Latau County magistrate issues non-dissemination order in Kohberger murder case. Following Bryan Kohberger's extradition hearing on January 3rd in Pennsylvania, Latau County Magistrate Judge Megan Marshall issued a non-dissemination, a gag order regarding the murder case, according to a press release from the Moscow Police Department will no longer be communicating with the public or media in any way. The order prohibits any communication by investigators, law enforcement, personnel, attorneys, and agents of the prosecuting attorney or defense attorney concerning this case, stated in the release. Issuing a non-dissemination order is not uncommon in high-profile criminal cases in order to keep jurors from hearing information before a trial begins and to make sure the defendant gets a fair trial. In the order signed by Judge Marshall, it states that the order shall remain in full force and effect throughout these proceedings until such time as a verdict has been returned, unless modified by the court. Until a verdict is entered regarding Kohberger's case, none of the officials involved will be able to speak about the case in any way to the public. This could be especially important considering that Latau County has a small jury pool where most likely everyone that lives there is aware of the story. The order was filed at 4:58 p.m. So a gag order has been issued. No one pertaining to this case in a legal manner can speak of any said information, as so the defendant, alleged defendant, can get a fair trial. And naturally, this is a very small demographic. Most people know of each other and know of the case. Now, what will be interesting is if his attorney will ask for a change of venue, because that usually happens, as you have heard in high-profile cases. An attorney, public defender, or hired attorney will ask for a change of venue. Now, where will they go? Let's just say hypothetical. Where will they go where no one has heard of this case? In that general area, from what? Washington State, Oregon, Utah, Idaho, possibly nowhere. I don't think anywhere in those surrounding states, there's not a human that hasn't heard of that case. This case here, excuse me, of these kids being murdered. I doubt it. But we will see what happens and what information will come out. So that leaves only the parents to speak about their children, perhaps. We know that Mr. Gonsalves has been very vocal in his opinions pertaining to law enforcement and their handling of the case, but now he has spoken more positive words pertaining to the case, and hopefully this will bring some type of closure as far as now having an alleged suspect in the case, and the grieving process can begin for all of the family members. Naturally, they won't forget about their child, but at least they don't have to be concerned with a perpetrator walking around and not being apprehended. Thank you for joining me. If you'd like to donate to this great network, $Big Angie, 129 Cash App. All stickers and chats are welcome during this live stream. Good morning, everyone. Hello, Andrea, Sundown Farms. Thank you for joining this early morning live stream. 3-part conversation: gag order, ancestral DNA match to the Idaho students, and did he plan to leave Pullman, Washington? Thank you all so much for following the content. Let's go over here to KREM2 News. Please subscribe to this network if you want to get said information and updates pertaining to this diabolical case coming out of Idaho. In this commentary, this is where you're going to hear about the car, the white Elantra, the VIN number, the car being registered in Pullman, Washington, 5 days after the murders of the kids, which was November 13th. November 18th, he registers the car. So cocky he is. And also stayed behind 1 month later. 1 month later. So what were his plans? Because he did not ditch school and leave and take the car and hide the car. Naturally, it was 2 weeks to 3 weeks when the bolo went out on the car, which was the 7th of December. So the kids were murdered on November 13th. A few weeks later, the Elantra is introduced as a witness. That means someone gave up information, also seen on the CCTV going by a gas station. Who knows what else information was given to police pertaining to the car and the occupants of the car. And all this led to Mr. Kohberger. No matter how you chop it up, no matter what he thinks, no matter what his parents think, family thinks, strangers think, the car was the first tip brought out to the public pertaining to this alleged suspect. And then we got a DNA match through ancestral heritage, and naturally, they got his DNA directly. And then all roads led back to Kohberger. So that's not erroneous assumption, your DNA. Let's hear what they have to say at KREM2 News. Thank you for joining me.
Arrangements currently are being made to deliver Kohberger back to Idaho, where he can have continued due process and face these charges.
Pennsylvania State Police giving an update on the next steps for the man accused of murdering 4 University of Idaho students. Good evening and thank you for joining us for KREM2 News at 6 tonight. I'm Mark Hanrahan. With me has the evening off. 28-year-old Bryan Kohberger has waived his extradition, which means he'll be brought to Idaho to face 4 murder charges and 1 burglary charge. A WSU criminology graduate student is accused of killing the 4 students in their off-campus home a little more than 7 weeks ago. We bring you complete team coverage tonight. Our Janelle Finch has more on what happened in the courtroom today as the suspect faced a judge. Nicole Hernandez breaks down new body camera footage of the suspect behind the wheel of a white Hyundai Elantra. Shannon Mowdy spoke with Eastern Washington's prosecuting attorney on the process of prosecuting such a case of this magnitude. And finally, Armando Rowley is taking a look into questions that we still have about the case. But first, we're going to head down to Moscow, where according to police, the suspect has 10 days to be brought to Idaho. So that means he could be here as soon as tomorrow or the end of next week. Our Kyle Simchuk joining us live in Moscow tonight as we wait for his arrival. Kyle? Well, Kohberger's new home will be at the Latah County Jail right behind me once he's brought back to Moscow. But, of course, the 28-year-old still thousands of miles in Pennsylvania. And, Mark, as you mentioned, he could be brought back as early as tomorrow, but a judge says that extradition will happen within at least 10 days. So the big question now is how and when will Kohberger be brought back? Authorities tonight telling KREM2 News that they're keeping that information a secret, citing security concerns. But as we've said, Kohberger could be here as early as tomorrow. And once he does return, he'll have an initial court appearance. And that's when that probable cause affidavit of facts will be released. And that'll be a treasure trove of information showing exactly what authorities, what evidence they've gathered in the house and what evidence they say they have against Kohberger. And once he makes that court appearance, KREM2 will obviously be here. But today in Pennsylvania, he did tell a judge that he's not taking any medications and that his decision to voluntarily return to Moscow, that's his own decision. So we'll certainly be keeping an eye on when he returns. Send it back to you. Kyle, live in Moscow tonight. Kyle, thank you very much. And today, Bryan Kohberger, the man suspected of killing 4 University of Idaho students, made his first court appearance. Kohberger and his attorney appeared before a judge at the Monroe County Courthouse. KREM2's Janelle Finch joining us live in the studio tonight to tell us more about what happened in the courtroom and what's next for the suspected killer. Janelle?
Mark, since Kohberger was identified as a suspect in the Moscow murder investigation, the world has been watching for his next move. Today, he appeared in Pennsylvania court, where he waived his extradition hearing. Now begins the process of getting Kohberger to Idaho. America just made history.
Sorry about that brief intermission. Yes, he has appeared in court. That was yesterday in Pennsylvania. The next step now is to extradite him back to the great state of Idaho. Thank you for joining me. This is The Vault.
Donning a bulletproof vest under a red jail jumpsuit, walked into the Monroe County Courthouse today. Here, he and his attorneys stood in front of a judge and waived his extradition. Doing this puts the wheels in motion to get Kohberger to Idaho, where he'll face first-degree murder and burglary charges. WNEP, our sister station in Pennsylvania, was in the courtroom where no cameras were allowed. They report every seat was filled, and Kohberger's family was in the front row. A CBS News correspondent says Kohberger remained stoic and calm, while his mother and sister sobbed through the hearing. Following his first courtroom appearance, Pennsylvania State Police hosted a press conference to share more details on Kohberger's arrest.
Tactical assets were then staged in the county, in Monroe County, into the evening of Thursday, December 29th, last Thursday. And in the early hours of Friday, December 30th, those warrants were executed at the location. Mr. Kohberger was taken into custody without incident.
Officials say they understand the public wants to be informed, but sharing certain information could interfere with the court system's due process.
We're trying to balance essentially two things: the public's desire for information against the need to maintain the integrity of the investigation and protect the suspects, accused at this point's due process.
Upon waiving his extradition, court order says Kohberger will be in Idaho within the next 10 days. But as his Pennsylvania public defender told our sister station, Kohberger could be in Idaho as early as tonight or tomorrow. Following today's press conference, law enforcement says travel arrangements are being made. Moscow police say that they're keeping these details quiet for security reasons. In the studio, Janelle Finch, Crime 2 News.
All right, Janelle, thank you very much. And new tonight, we have video connecting the Hyundai Elantra Idaho police were looking for to the suspected murderer. Crime 2's Nicole Hernandez has body camera footage tonight from a traffic stop with the suspect and chilling new details about the car's history. Nicole?
So you actually see the trooper pull up and approach the car. Then you see Bryan Kohberger in the driver's seat right here just for a half a second. Quickly, the officer moves, leans down, and then obstructs the view of the camera there. There is another person in the driver's seat that we know is Kohberger's dad, but we are keeping him anonymous. Again, quickly, that officer does lean down, blocking the camera's view. But what's important to note is the date in the top right corner of this video from December 15th. That is 8 days after the Moscow Police Department started asking the public for information about a white Hyundai Elantra. And this new body camera footage is the second time law enforcement pulled over the suspected killer in the same day. Just minutes before, a deputy from Hancock County Sheriff's Department had stopped Kohberger and his dad.
So 8 days later, from the initial release of the police asking for the general public's help in identifying a white Hyundai Elantra between 2011, 2013, that was the initial information that the occupants were possible witnesses. Somebody gave up information pertaining to this car. 8 days later, in this body cam footage, it's Mr. Bryan and his father in a vehicle in the state of Indiana, pulled over by a state trooper. Very interesting information. So was he leaving just for Christmas break or try to get the car out of Dodge? Because as I said in the beginning, he registered his car on the 18th of November, which is 5 days after the murders. So he stayed behind after killing the kids, registering the car. A week later, finished his coursework. The bolo comes out on the car December 7th, and 8 days later, he's on the highway with his father, driving back to Pennsylvania. Was he trying to leave or just going on vacation? Who knows?
From Hancock County Sheriff's Department had stopped Kohberger and his dad. In a statement from Indiana State Police, they say the trooper did not have information on Kohberger at the time or the license plate number of the car Idaho detectives were looking for. And we also have a second angle from this traffic stop. That's right here. This is from the trooper's dash camera. From this, we were able to read the license plate on that white Hyundai Elantra.
Now, before she goes into the information pertaining to the license plate, this is a very interesting storyline. Very, very interesting. Because I'm trying to understand how a person was so cocky to run over to another state 15 minutes away, kill some kids, leave out, register the cars a week later, register his car in the same state, town where he resides. He was arrogant. Because as I said, he registered his car a week later, stayed behind, but then a few weeks later, the bolo comes out, and just so happened, a week after that alert comes to the public, which was on December 7th, you have 8 days later, this now body cam footage of him riding down the highway. Very brazen. So did he change his mind and decide, I'm going to get out of here? they've released this information about this car. But one could say, was he following the information online, listening? Of course he was listening. Has he been in chat rooms, Facebook groups, other sites, apps, talking, commenting? Possibly. Video release, people assuming it's him in a video, do not know if it's him or not. Can't really be verified because the picture is grainy of the person filming their laptop with the cell phone. But I'm sure he was communicating via social media, giving his commentary pertaining to the case. So that still shows brazenness and cockiness. Now, on the flip side of this, one could say, well, the bolo came out on December 7th. He didn't rush and leave. Because 9 times out of 10, like I said, he was paying attention to the media, social media. Wouldn't he have left right after the Sabbath? But you have to ask yourself the obvious question. When did his coursework end? Because if he still was attending class on the 7th, it was up to him to decide if he wanted to stay and finish the coursework or bail out once the information was released pertaining to the white Elantra. But being cocky, maybe he just didn't care. Scared? Maybe. You're never going to know because he's never going to tell the truth. But you could argue it both ways. He didn't care because he stayed behind a month later, number one. Register his car a week later after killing the kids, number two. Number three, he finished his coursework. If he wanted to leave, he could have left beforehand when the bolo was issued on the 7th of December. 8 days later, he's in a car in Indiana with his father. But the thing about the human mind is you can change your mind at any time. So as I said before, what was the end result with traveling to Pennsylvania? Because he did not pack up his apartment, to my knowledge. They retrieved items out of there, such as a computer drive. So that means he left it behind. And they didn't say the apartment was empty because they were carrying things out. So that would lead one to believe he was going to return back to that apartment. It's just the timing looks strange because of the bolo of the car. 8 days later, he's on the highway with his father. National alert pertaining to the car. But as I said, I believe he heard about the car day one, and he had ample enough time to get out of Dodge and hide that car, but he did not. He could have easily left. Easily had left. Easily had his parents or somebody register his car even in Pennsylvania. Stay woke. Thank you for joining me. Let's finish this commentary. After this, we will go back to the DNA scenario to show how he was linked to this crime in Moscow, Idaho. The accuracy of the DNA testing itself and how it came to be that it matched with Bryan Kohberger. Thank you for joining me.
License plate on that white Hyundai Elantra. I used that license plate number to find the car's VIN number in an online database. Then with that VIN number, I found the car's Carfax, and that's what we're looking at right here. This shows the most recent owner bought the vehicle in 2019 in Pennsylvania, and then in 2020, just about a month later, registered that car in Pennsylvania as well. The owner then re-registered the car, got it serviced a few times since then. Then on November 18th of this year, right here is when we see the owner re-registered the car in Pullman, Washington to get Washington plates. That happened again, November 18th, 2022, just 5 days after Kohberger allegedly stabbed all 4 students. We did reach out to the Washington Department of Licensing to confirm Kohberger is the one who is registered to this car. We have not heard back yet, but we do know he was the one driving the Elantra in that Indiana State Body Police camera footage. In studio, Nicole Hernandez, Crime 2 News.
Nicole, thank you very much. In our commitment to bringing more to every story, Crime 2 Shannon Mounty continues our team coverage tonight by digging deeper into a case of this magnitude. Shannon is live outside the federal courthouse in downtown Spokane after learning more about the legal process. Shannon?
I sat down with the U.S. District Attorney for Washington's Eastern District, Vanessa Waldrop, just to talk generally about prosecuting a case like this, one that is so high profile. Now, Waldrop says that cases like this that are large and complex, they can take some time to prosecute because the investigating doesn't stop once that arrest is made. And prosecutors actually work with investigators from right at the beginning, even before a suspect is identified. Waldrop says they treat every case, regardless of the public attention on it, as serious.
I'm Hassie Parsons, and I'm
Sorry about that intermission.
high-profile cases often are in the news, and people really are passionate about wanting to know more information. But honestly, we take every case equally seriously, and we'll be running down evidence and making sure there's a thorough investigation and viable prosecution on any case that we want to move forward with. And for every victim, every case is a high-profile case.
Now, Waldrop.
Every victim. Well, I don't know if that's true. I don't know if every victim and family member can say that their case is high profile. And that's another content I would like to bring to the forefront. Many people are murdered every day, and people around the country and the world do not hear of their murders because naturally no one can keep up with every crime that happens in America and abroad. But there are many people who are murdered in America. Many people are missing in America. Many women, children, female, male, African Americans, indigenous persons, and nobody knows that they're missing. Nobody knows that they're dead. But let's just keep it real. This case is nationally known because it was 4 people killed at the same time. They were students, and I also believe because they were Caucasian, and that is the said information. But there are many people who are murdered, and I don't think they would think the relatives or whomever that it's high profile. Because how can it be high profile? Every case is high profile to them. You mean it's of importance to them. But every case is not a high profile case. That is not true. I disagree with her statement there. Because a lot of people have to go to the news and the paper to stay on them to keep the story alive pertaining to their loved one or their friend who went missing or was murdered and they don't have a suspect. So every case is not high profile. And I don't believe every person related to a crime thinks of themselves or their case as high profile. That I don't understand how she could even make that type of statement because that's not true. That's not true at all.
Now, Waldrop says that those cases take a long time, not only because they are still investigating and investigators and the prosecutors want to make sure that they can provide a complete case to an impartial jury, but also on the defense side so that they have time to put their evidence and review all the evidence and provide a fair trial for the defendant. Live in Spokane, Shannon Noddy, Crime 2 News.
All right, Shannon, thank you very much. And there are still a lot of questions surrounding the latest developments in this quadruple homicide investigation. So we continue our team coverage with Crime 2's Amanda Rowley tonight. She is live in the newsroom with what we're still tracking right now. Amanda?
Well, Mark, it's now been 7 weeks since 4 University of Idaho students were found stabbed to death in their Moscow home near the university campus. Now, with the arrest of a murder suspect, this brings up even more questions than before. So here are the top Big 10 questions we're tracking right now. First off, motive. What is the motive behind the murder of the 4 students? What is the suspect's connection to the 4 U of I students? Are police looking for additional suspects or accomplices? How many other DNA profiles were found at the crime scene? What are the tips or evidence that led police to the suspect? What is the murder weapon? When will the cleanup at that crime scene begin? It was paused by the court.
Exactly.
Details about the suspect's car. We want to know, will it be brought back to Moscow from Pennsylvania? What items belonging to the suspect did law enforcement seize? And when will the next Moscow Police Department press conference be? These are just some of the most pressing questions surrounding this case, which is why we can...
Those are great questions. The car, will the car come back? I would assume that it's being looked over thoroughly in the state of Pennsylvania by the state police and agents there, because that would be a lot of work to try to get the car back across the country to the Pacific Northwest to be analyzed. I would hope that they would do a thorough job in Pennsylvania to execute DNA testing and all swabs of the car. Weapon not found. Where did he dispose of the weapon? Great questions. What did he do with the weapon? Did he leave behind an apartment? You also have to ask that question. What was retrieved out of his apartment? What did he leave behind? Anything incriminating that will link him to 1122, such as any trophies from the house, bloody clothes, shoes. Did he take anything from the residence? What's on the computers, devices, iPads, cell phones, alternate cell phones? Did he ping at the house? Did he take his phone? Many people have asked that question pertaining to who the perpetrator was at that time. Did they carry their phone with them? Only a fool would have carried their phone. But if you're thinking you're not going to get caught, you'd be cocky enough to carry your phone while in the commission of a crime. And also he has a burglary charge for breaking into the said home and committing quadruple homicide. A lot of questions pertaining to this Bryan Kohberger. Too many, matter of fact.
Some of the most pressing questions surrounding this case, which is why we continue to call on Moscow PD to share the latest details. Now, just minutes ago, Moscow PD sent out a press release saying because of a court order, a recent one just filed, the Moscow Police Department will no longer be communicating with the public or media about this case. And we're going to flesh out what this means and keep you posted. But in the meantime, today we also learned that the search warrant for Bryan Kohberger's student apartment is now sealed. We obtained copies of the court.
So now the search of the apartment is sealed. The rest is sealed until he touches down and goes to court. Then information will be released pertaining to the prosecution's case against Mr. Kohberger. A lot of information relayed. A lot of questions being asked. One piece of information you're going to hear, why information is not coming out pertaining to the arrest, as I just said, to preserve the integrity of investigation. It also states protecting the victims and the witnesses. So I had to think about that last night. Like, well, the victims are deceased, so why would you be trying to protect them? The witnesses. Somebody would ask, well, who are the witnesses? Very good question. Who are the witnesses in this case? Because obviously that's in the report. Who has spoken up against Bryan? Anything direct? Saw something that night? Saw him later after the crime? Who are the witnesses? What are the video footages they have pertaining to the car? Him? Was the car at the scene of the crime directly? Was the car parked near the house? Is he seen coming in, going out, getting into the car? Has the car been seen near the house or on that street before? Because they did ask us, if you've seen this car on the 12th or beforehand, let us know. So did he drive around that neighborhood? How did he come to pick this house? Follow the girls on social media? There's lots of questions. What is the nexus, as they say, pertaining to the victims? And I do believe they have information pertaining to that. Maybe that's why that's also not being released, how he came to know the victims. And I think that's what they mean by protecting the victims, is that they're not wanting to release how he came to know of them and or choose them as victims. I hope my assumption is correct. And also witnesses involved in the case. These will be people who saw or heard something pertaining to the crime and the alleged suspect. in this case. So who saw something? Who gave up information about the car? How many videos have been gathered pertaining to the car and Mr. Bryan, his comings and goings in the general area, the house? Did he talk to other people pertaining to the girls? So you have to ask all those questions because he seems to be up and down emotionally, up today, down tomorrow, during his hunt for prey. Perhaps he asked people about the girls, frequent places they hung out, worked. Maybe he asked somebody. And let's also talk about the Corner Club briefly. They have issued a statement that he was not there that night and nobody was barred or kicked out of the bar on the night of that would have possibly been the 12th through the 13th of November. Let me repeat that. No one was thrown out of the bar at that corner bar where the girls were last partying, let's say, before the grub bus. And the Corner Club has issued a statement on Twitter. I read the statement. Nobody was kicked out. He was not there. But had he been there before, how about that? Because I do not know how their video surveillance works. Does it re-record after a few days, 7 days? And I believe that's the reason why they leaked the footage out. It would have believed those were the two girls at the corner bar because they were trying to let you know this person that you all were focusing on perhaps wasn't the suspect, one of the jacks. And this is what happens when you throw daggers and accuse people of something. You now have a suspect who is allegedly linked to the crime. I don't even want to use the word alleged. I don't believe the DNA lies because now you have to say that the lab made a mistake. And that the DNA inside of the person is a mistake. Well, the DNA inside of you can't be a mistake. So you'd have to say the lab made a mistake and pointed the finger at this person. But yet that makes no sense because they tracked him through ancestral DNA plus taking his own DNA from his person. So how could that all be a lie and erroneous assumption? Thank you for joining me.
Is now sealed. We obtained copies of the court order to seal it, and that order says it was sealed partly because of a serious and imminent threat to the privacy of witnesses, victims, and victims' families. The search warrant won't be unsealed until March. Now, we also know, based on the timeline released by Moscow PD, two of the students, it's Madison Mogan and Kaylee Gonsalves, went to the Corner Club in downtown Moscow the night before their death. There's been speculation that Kohberger was at that very same bar. But yesterday, the Corner Club tweeted this: suspect was not and has not been here. No one was removed from the bar the evening of the incident. Stop calling us. While numerous questions surrounding this case are still left unanswered, we remain diligent in tracking this information. Now, we do expect to learn some details once the probable cause documents are filed in Latah County. Reporting in the newsroom, Amanda Rowley, KREM 2 News.
Amanda, thank you very much. The news that Kohberger will soon be in Idaho comes as the community continues to remember the 4 University of Idaho students whose lives were cut short. Those 4 students were 20-year-old Ethan Chapin, a freshman from Conway, Washington, Xana Kernodle, a junior from Post Falls, and 21-year-old Madison Mogan, a senior from Coeur d'Alene. Xana and Madison worked together at a restaurant in downtown Moscow, and 21-year-old Kaylee Gonsalves, a senior from Rathdrum, Idaho. She was a sorority member and had already lined up a job for after graduation. A little more than a month ago, a vigil was held for the victims where their parents spoke about the love they had for their children.
We are eternally grateful that we spent so much time with him. And I want to remind you that that's the most important message that we have for you and your families, is to make sure that you spend as much time as possible with those people, because time is precious and it's something you can't get back.
Very true.
I'm so glad that she got to just have at least a little taste of what it's like to be in love with someone. And he's just a really great guy. And they treated each other the way you're supposed to. And I was really proud to just call him my daughter's boyfriend, and maybe someday, maybe they would have gotten married, you know. It seemed like it, at least.
It's a shame, and it hurts. But the beauty of the two always being together is something that it comforts us. It lets us know that they were with their best friends in the whole world. It's like a book. It's like some kind of terrible chapter, but there's beauty in it, and we're going to get our justice. We're going to figure this stuff out. This community deserves that.
Well, this continues to be a developing story, and we will bring you updates as soon as we learn more. Coming up at 6:30 tonight, we'll hear from locals in Pennsylvania about the significance of today's hearing being held in their city. In the meantime, for all of our coverage on this story, you can text us the word Idaho to 509-448-2000, and we'll send that link directly to your phone.
All right, everybody. Great commentary by KREM2 News, Krim. Please check out their content. Subscribe to their network to get notifications directly for updates pertaining to this story. To recap you with this live stream, I'm 51 minutes into this stream. Thank you for joining me. This is The Vault. A gag order has been issued for all persons involved in the case legally. Defense attorneys, prosecution, law officials cannot speak pertaining to the crime. This is to preserve the investigation, to make sure that the suspect gets a fair trial when it's time for this to go to trial of this case. Also, report sealed as not to give information out pertaining to victims, witnesses, and their privacy, because naturally everyone's privacy has been bombarded with the murders, accusations, assumptions, dagger throwing, lies, basically. A lot of lies have come from this case. People have made up every type of lie that they could possibly come up with. And what's even more sickening is you now have a suspect in custody and you're still making up lies pertaining to the suspect and the victims and the people who knew the victims, which is so disrespectful. And I did not indulge in it, and I was not going to. And now that you have a suspect in custody, there's a suspect linked by DNA. I'm going to ride with what they have. I'm still not going to jump on the bandwagon to any made up lies, stories, and gossip pertaining to Mr. Kohberger or the victims or anybody that wants to speak out pertaining to him and the victims. I will wait to see what the evidence is by the prosecution, the nexus between he and the girls. And as one commentator has said, expert, you have no proof that he knew of the girls and that they knew that he knew them, vice versa. Because knowing of someone is not knowing them. And you can think you know somebody and still don't know them. Possibly he just saw them on social media pages. Naturally, suggestions come up in your Facebook of people. Could have found them that way. Could have drove over to Moscow to see what the sites were like. It's just 15 minutes away. So it's not like he went far out of the way to do anything. It's right next door. I also told you in a previous live that they have a rideshare van that circumferences all these small towns and universities together. So you can go from one entity to the other via a shuttle from the schools. Maybe that's how he went over to the town to look around. I don't know. I'll have to wait till they bring forth the information to check out everything. But praying that we'll get that said information. Thank you for joining me. 1 second. Thank you, T. Thank you for that. Very sick situation. A lot of questions. Everybody's looking for the answers, the connection to these kids and Mr. Kohberger. As I said, we'll have to wait and see. But let's talk about the DNA. I brought you information pertaining to Ancestry DNA, how it came to be that law officials linked, just call him BK, just easier, BK to this crime Very interesting. When you think of BK and then BTK killer, very interesting. But nonetheless, I brought you information, 99% accuracy, relatives linked to him, which led to them discovering who he is, which led to gathering more DNA from him directly, plus his link to the car, the white Elantra, 2015. And I always wondered if that was the accurate year, 11 to 13, when I did my little research briefly a week or so ago. I said, maybe they're off on the year of that car. Maybe it's past 2011 or 13. We now learn that it's a 2015 make and model. DNA. What did he leave behind at the scene of the crime? He thought he was clever, a smart ass, a smart aleck, grandiose attitude, godlike complex, narcissist, possible sociopath or psychopath. What is he? Antisocial personality. What is his diagnosis? He says he's not taking any current medicines, but perhaps maybe he needs to have some medicine. Because one would say, oh, he's crazy. He's crazy for what he did. Well, I say he's lucid and he knows what he did in Moscow, Idaho. So what did he leave behind? Sweat, skin cells, semen, blood. Did he cut himself? Because that's going to be hard to explain in a jury pool how your DNA got mixed in with the blood. See, it's one thing to say we found a fingerprint on a door handle, that he can make up a lie and say, well, I was invited over there. I was invited by some people I met. They said they were having a party. But if your blood or any of your hair follicles, hair shedding, the girls and guy pulled your hair, DNA under their fingernails, how are you going to explain why your DNA to a stranger is under their fingernails? Because I believe a few victims fought back. So I won't doubt that Ethan fought him back. Both tall men, they were going toe to toe in that house, I'm sure. So how would his DNA, Bryan's DNA, get under the fingernails of the victims? And as Banfield says in this next commentary, you're talking about 40 fingers. Boy, when she said that, that gave me something to pause and think about. 40 fingers. So how many fingernails hold DNA? How many girls had possibly broke fingernails fighting him back? Hair follicles left behind, shedding hair. Does he have a dog, a cat? Did he leave anything behind? Carpet from his apartment. What did he take out of there back to his apartment, such as DNA, skin cells, hair from the victims, back to his house, on his clothes? Where are his clothes? Where did he dispose his clothes? Did he throw them away? Tried to wash them? What? You know, blood can't come out of clothes. So the natural thing to do would be to throw them out. But then you got to count he left the scene and got in that white Elantra. So what did he leave behind inside the car? And naturally, when you get in your car, you're touching everything. The visor, the door handle, inside the door handle, steering wheel, console, your light switch, all of that. So he took something from the scene and put it in that car. And even if he went and vacuumed it out, cleaned it up, got it washed up inside by hand, does not mean something wasn't left behind. So I'm sure they're spraying that car or sprayed it with luminol to see if it lights up. Because even if he got in that car, bloody clothes, transferring DNA mixed in with he and the other victims, he cleans up the car, he still can't mask the blood. Could have brought hair from the scene and got in his car, on his clothes. What did he leave behind? And what did he take out of 1122 King Road pertaining to the victims? News Nation is the source. Examining DNA collection, processing in Idaho murder case. This is Banfield. Thank you for joining me, everybody. Thank you, T.
More than 6 weeks, 20,000 tips, and what will be a second cross-country trip. The suspect in the Idaho college murders will soon be back in Moscow, and it is likely because of evidence that is too small for the naked eye to see. The reports say that Moscow police have matched Bryan Kohberger's DNA to some DNA evidence that was found at the crime scene, and that, my friends, is impressive for 2 reasons. Let me tell you why. The crime scene was a well-known party house visited by hundreds of kids and tenants over the years. So how on earth they isolated just one man's DNA from all the other sources in that house? Well, that in itself is remarkable. And then there's this. Kohberger doesn't have a criminal record. So it is highly unlikely that his DNA was in any criminal database. So how did they track one person's DNA at the crime scene all the way to Kohberger, 2,500 miles away? It turns out it's a multi-step process, and it is fascinating. I'm joined by Joseph Scott Morgan. He is a certified death investigator and forensic analyst. He's also the distinguished scholar of applied forensics at Jacksonville State University. Okay, Joe, this is your backyard. How do they determine that one foreign source of DNA at the crime scene actually belongs to a killer, as opposed to all the other people who've come in and out of that house invited and party guests and former tenants?
Well, we have to think about those that are currently domiciled in the home, and you begin to eliminate them. Certainly, these poor victims, they have DNA samples from them that would have been taken at autopsy, and then you have the 2 that were spared down the lower section. They would have done buccal mucosal swabs or cheek scrapings on them and eliminated them. And then any of these parties that would have had intimate relationships where you would have rich source DNA, semen, blood, that sort of thing, you would have gone out if they were given those names and collected those samples. Now, all the other DNA that you're talking about that's in this environment was probably touch DNA, and that's only fragmented DNA that you have. It's not a full partial, it's not a full strand, it's only a partial strand. That comes from the sloughing of dead skin cells. So then after you have all of that, you eliminate everybody that's known, and then if you come up with one person, that's who you have to go after.
Forget it. That to me would have taken years because hundreds and hundreds of kids have come in and out of that house. I thought you were going to say, honestly, that the skin that was under the fingernails of the victims, that's not a party goer, or the blood from the killer who accidentally got cut and shed his own wet blood. Well, no party goer would have shed wet blood that night.
Exactly.
Or maybe a hair that was on top of a pool of blood. Well, that would have to come from someone who was there after. So that's what I thought they probably collected, as opposed to just some DNA that was found in the house.
No. Let me be very clear. When we say blood in the house, okay, if he did in fact cut himself, and we're assuming that this sample comes from blood, there are other means that you can get rich DNA, semen, saliva, even sweat, Ashley. But in this case, I think that the fingernails are going to, you remember you aired one of the first pieces about this nationally, relative to bagging the hands. We're back to that now. Not just skin are you going to have beneath the fingernails. You kind of have blood as well. And there might be hair, full hair, where you have a follicle and you have a root and you can dig into that. That's what's so fascinating about this. And then after that piece, that's when genetic genealogy comes in.
Well, that's piece 2, and that's fascinating. But I am so interested in your science, especially when I think of the 40 fingernails that had to be scraped, because there were 4 victims with 10 fingers each, 10 fingernails. And what also was fascinating is which one of those victims might have had some fingernail scrapings, because that's going to be something that the defendant is going to want to know and may not know for a long time, because of course he could fashion a defense as to why his fingernail scrapings might be under a girl, but how could he fashion a defense as to why they'd be under 3 or 4 people? Joe, I have to leave it there, but I'm going to have you back because this conversation is a lot longer. So I always love what you have to say. Joseph Scott Morgan joining us tonight. Okay, so that was
very true. 40 fingers from the victim's total. Who has DNA belonging to Bryan under their fingernails? That's a lot of fingers. And if we're to believe that two fought back, how are you going to explain your DNA under someone's fingernails that you don't know, mixed in with blood, skin cells, so on and so forth? That's definitely not erroneous, an erroneous assumption. If it comes out your DNA is under a dead woman, man's fingernails, broke off fingernails, cut up fingers, wrists, all of that. You possibly cut yourself. Stay woke. Your gashes on your wrist or hand may match wounds as the victims. Same knife. Assuming you use the same knife on each victim. See, he wasn't thinking. But this is what happens when you have a grandiose disposition. You feel you are untouchable, invincible. Nobody can do anything. You're going to get away with this, but you didn't. Scary for those involved in the case, parents, friends, community, law officials, but they got a hit. So the DNA don't lie. And it's easy to say, well, don't judge, wait till we go to court. Wait for what? They're going to bring out more information. And some of you still will be trying to say it wasn't him. So that's why I said, if you are willing to douse the DNA with gasoline early on, what are you going to do when they have other evidence such as video surveillance of a person coming and going from the house, seen by somebody, bloody fingerprints in places that shouldn't be? So whatever lie you try to spin, you have to come up with another lie to cover the last lie. Because you don't know if he wore gloves or not. You don't know if the weapon had a guard on it. He didn't cut himself. You don't know. But the point is, DNA was in that house, and they found it somewhere in there with the victims. And possibly on the victims, from the victims. So it's not erroneous assumption, the DNA. That makes no logical sense. Just say you don't want to believe your son, brother killed these kids and be done with it.
It's a lot longer. So I always love what you have to say. Joseph Scott Morgan joining us tonight. Okay, so that was step one. Isolating the suspect's DNA from the crime scene. Right, that's the first part. But step two is identifying who the mystery DNA belongs to. A few years ago, if the killer wasn't already like a criminal with his DNA sitting in the criminal system, right? Well, investigators would have a really tough time finding him, right? Like the Golden State Killer. They couldn't find that guy for decades because he was a cop. He wasn't a criminal with a bunch of DNA sitting in a criminal system somewhere. But today...
Intermission, sorry about that. Yes, new technology today.
Today, companies like 23andMe and Ancestry.com, they've got all of us, like criminals and non-criminals alike. We're all spitting into a tube and mailing it off to these companies voluntarily. We're sending in our DNA. So all cops have to do these days is call up those databases and submit the killer's DNA sample. And then voila, up comes an entire family tree. And likely that killer is somewhere in that family tree. Problem is, you got to figure out which member of the family tree is the killer. And for that part of the process, I want to bring in CeCe Moore. She is an investigative genealogist. She's known as the DNA detective. She's helped identify more than 200 violent criminals. So CeCe, this is tricky and it's fascinating, but you got this massive family tree, maybe 30 or 50 or 100 members of the family. Where do you start? How do you weed out which members of the family are innocent and which one is the one that matches what they found at the crime scene?
Well, taking a step back, it's not quite as simple as you just laid it out, because Ancestry DNA and 23andMe, which are the largest databases by far, actually bar law enforcement from using them. And so we are limited in this work to the two smallest genetic genealogy databases, which are GEDmatch and Family Tree DNA. And so we can only compare against a total of about 2 million genetic profiles. If somebody's DNA is being used for these cases, they have consented to that. In GEDmatch and Family Tree DNA, they have been notified that law enforcement is using the databases, and they have opted in or not opted out in one case.
So the opting part, that's the fascinating
Exactly.
part, because I know that early on in the 23andMe and Ancestry, it was kind of open season until they freaked out and thought, oh gosh, don't get our company involved in this. And then it became an option for us, the customer, to say, yeah, I'm fine, you can pop my DNA into any database, or no, you may not. Don't we have that option?
No, Ancestry DNA and 23andMe will not allow law enforcement to use their database, and it has never been used for investigative genetic genealogy to my.
Now, I did bring you that said information earlier when I started this live pertaining to Ancestry, that the FBI law officials can't use their databases for investigative purposes. And you now hear it being mentioned here in this commentary that certain databases will not allow law enforcement to use it for investigative purposes.
Knowledge, and I'm pretty dialed in. I think I would know. I actually approached them back in 2011 and 12 and asked them if they were willing to work with crime scene DNA. They made it very clear from the very beginning they would never be involved with this.
Wow.
They have deep pockets and big legal teams, and they will fight any effort of law enforcement to get into their databases. And so it's the two small companies only that give you that option to opt in. Now,
why would a company not want to be of service to law enforcement if they indeed bring forward a warrant and the probable cause? Why would these big companies not want to lend their matches? So you hear her saying two smaller companies aid law enforcement, which is really sad and pathetic because we're in a world where people are committing crimes. And as you hear, 4 kids were murdered. And law officials and the families wanted this solved. So this is dangerous. Hearing this, big companies do not want to aid law officials in a crime investigation. Very scary information. Very scary. I wonder if that will change. Have to go about it legally, I guess, to say, hey, we need your help. But this shows you how the world is. And as you hear, they have big pockets. So therefore, they have lawyers that can fight it. Mercy.
So it's the two small companies only that give you that option to opt in. Now, if you've tested at one of the big companies like Ancestry, you can download your raw genetic data file and upload it to GEDmatch and opt into law enforcement.
Okay. So tell me this. Once they get a family tree, what's next? You got, people all over the world potentially, with the last name Smith. How do you determine between all the Smiths who the person is you need?
Well, you don't get a family tree. What happens is you get a list of matches, and that's people that are sharing small amounts of DNA with that unknown suspect. If you get lucky, maybe you'll get a first cousin, and then you're in business because you only have to go back to grandparents to find that common ancestor. But most of the time, we're using second, third, fourth, fifth cousins and beyond. So we have to build trees for a dozen or 2 dozen, 3 dozen people and try to find the patterns and the commonalities, identify the common ancestors in their trees. And from that, we can reverse engineer this unknown suspect's family tree. And so there's a lot of work.
Yeah, and I was going to say a lot of gumshoe after that, right? So don't you look at cousin, Ethel is only, she's 90, so she didn't commit this crime. And cousin Eric is in jail, so he's got an alibi. And, cousin Mike is 9, so he didn't commit this. Is that literally what you do until you get a group of potential suspects who could have committed this? Then you got to actually gumshoe and follow them and get their DNA to match against the source DNA.
It depends how much you have to work with in that database. And part of that is luck. Have any of his closer relatives tested and uploaded there and opted in. Or if you only are working with very distant cousins, then you have a lot more you need to look at. But if you're fortunate enough to be able to find a connection on his mom's side and his dad's side, then that would point just at his one family and only him, since he's the only son as far as I understand. Now, if you don't have that match data and you only have, say, one second cousin that is a really good match, then you have to go back to great-grandparents. And yes, they might have 20 great-grandsons. And at that case, that's where you start looking at who is the right gender, who is in the right age range, who might have lived near the crime scene,
Exactly.
and then who drove a white Elantra. And so we don't really know how much they had, but it is possible that the genetic genealogy pointed straight at him, and they only had to look at him.
Just remarkable science, and you're perfect for explaining it. CeCe Moore, thank you so much for being on tonight. Really appreciate it.
All right, everybody, that's Banfield News Nation. Exactly. You don't know how much they had to work with. And like I said, cousin of cousin of cousin, auntie, uncle, whoever put their information in the database, and then you go down the line and you work your way down to male DNA at the scene. Who lived near the scene? Who drives a white Elantra? And that's where you get Bryan Kohberger. So what's hard about that to understand? DNA has been proven to link people as parents of children, fathers, mothers, decedents, and the living. So why in this case, it's got to be junk science? Give it a rest. As I said, these people just need to accept the fact that his DNA was there, and you don't know where they got it, where in the crime scene they got the DNA, and you want someone to believe they just made up his DNA at a random crime scene in Moscow, Idaho. To stop the nonsense. This is what's amazing about people. They rarely want to accept the truth about people that 9 times out of 10, they already knew the person was a problem person, an ill person, sick person. And as soon as their name comes up in a crime, then it's, woe is me, I can't believe this is happening. They've got the wrong person. And that's why I said they could lay out all the evidence tomorrow, and there will still be people in the family and strangers would say, he didn't do it. He wasn't there. But as you hear in this commentary, the layout of the ancestry and how they knocked down the pins to link a certain person, that's what was done here. And as it's also been said, besides just the matches from the family members, they're going to go follow the person and get their DNA directly. So even with the ancestral DNA match plus direct DNA match from the person, him or herself, if it matches still to the scene, how are you going to say that's erroneous? That's an erroneous assumption. No, it's not. Just say you don't want to accept your child took out 4 people, snuffed them out brutally, savagely. You can't believe your brother did that. Or can you? You just don't want to say to the public, perhaps. Yeah, I know he was off his rocker. He was weird. He was awkward acting. He was volatile. But maybe we didn't think he would kill anybody. Well, allegedly he did. Thank you for joining me. News Nation is the source of that information pertaining to the DNA. If you need verification for anything in this live stream, I have brought forward a source. Also, beginning of this live, the ancestral DNA is thoroughly explained. 99% accuracy. Regular DNA testing, I would say the same, 99% accuracy. So what's the difference? What is next? for him. We will see.
Back to Idaho. I want him to be sick of seeing us and sick of knowing that these people won't let it go.
We're breaking down the science behind the investigation, as well as the impact the alleged killer's interest in criminology may have had on the crime scene.
We've taken leaps and bounds. We've jumped ahead in the recovery of evidence.
And what's next for the suspect?
I'm just as anxious, and the family is just as anxious to see the probable cause affidavit as everyone else is.
Law and Crime Daily, covering court cases from coast to coast. Welcome everybody to Law and Crime Daily. I'm Jesse Weber, and we're bringing you the very latest on the arrest of Bryan Kohberger, the 28-year-old grad student accused of mercilessly killing 4 University of Idaho students. The Washington State University doctoral student made his first court appearance on Tuesday, walking into the courthouse hours before his afternoon extradition hearing. Kohberger was arrested in Pennsylvania, thousands of miles away from the Idaho 4 investigation, when his semester at Washington State ended in December. He and his father took a pre-planned cross-country road trip back to Pennsylvania. Now, that trip was done in a white Hyundai Elantra, which we told you Moscow police were looking for weeks. They were actually pulled over twice in Indiana, once for speeding and once for tailgating. The Moscow police chief says that the department's only interaction with Kohberger in the small town was a traffic citation for driving without a seatbelt. He now faces charges that include 4 counts of first-degree murder as well as burglary. The Pennsylvania State Police just gave a press conference with details about Kohberger's apprehension.
Those affidavits attached to those search warrants are still under seal, so I can't discuss their contents with you. But one was for the person of Mr. Kohberger, collecting DNA and photographs, that sort of thing. One was for the white Elantra vehicle, which I understand has been seized and is being processed. And one was for the address, the residence itself that he's living in with his family. I was at the scene, and I have to say that Major Paris and Captain Norm Kramer did an outstanding job in coordinating the efforts, not only of the numerous Pennsylvania State police troopers there, but officers from other jurisdictions and disciplines within those jurisdictions to make this a very smooth, highly competent professional operation. It is a quirk, apparently. It's not in the norm of the states I'm familiar with that Idaho does not release their probable cause affidavit in support of their arrest warrant until after their defendant is brought or returned to that state. But having read those documents and the sealed affidavits of probable cause, I definitely believe that one of the main reasons the defendant chose to waive extradition and hurry his return back to Idaho was the need to know what was in those documents.
I agree.
So that's a significant development. Beyond that, looking at the scope of the situation and the ties this defendant has to my county, I would hold our office at the disposal of the Idaho authorities to help it.
Are you driving way left?
Sorry about that intermission. Breaking down the DNA and evidence pertaining to this case. Thank you for joining me. This is The Vault.
At the disposal of the Idaho authorities to help facilitate a complete background investigation into the defendant, both activities prior to the murders occurring within the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and his activities after the murders in Pennsylvania. So we stand ready to assist with that effort on an ongoing basis.
Some interesting comments there. Well, Steve Gonsalves, who's the father of Kaylee, has been very vocal since the start of this investigation, and he told media outlets that he and the other parents plan to be there when Kohberger appears in an Idaho court. In an interview with NBC News, he said the families still want answers.
Next mission is really to find justice and make sure that we have a closing chapter that meets the expectations of all the families.
Kohberger's family released a statement through a public defender. It says in part, quote, "We care deeply for the 4 families who have lost their precious children. There are no words that can adequately express the sadness we feel, and we pray each day for them. We will continue to let the legal process unfold, and as a family, we will love and support our son and brother. Long crime correspondent Sierra Gillespie was in.
Everyone knows how I feel about that commentary from the family to the victims' families. That commentary, as I said, you can't send condolences to someone about their dead child and then in the same breath say, well, we love and support our son and we're holding out for as the presumption of innocence. That's just disrespectful. So see, there's narcissism even in that commentary. Hey, we're sorry about the death of your kid. We hear that our kid did it, but we don't believe he did it. We're going to presume he's innocent, and we're not going to jump on board with any erroneous assumptions. You're going to hear me mention that a lot until this case is over with. All you have to do is just send your condolences that their children were murdered. What you should be saying is, I'm praying my son did not do this. We've heard that DNA has linked him to this crime, but those comments should have been separate. Send the condolences, and then in a separate commentary, you speak of his presumption of innocence, and I don't think he did it, and or I pray he didn't do it. Because really, people don't want to hear that. Their child was bludgeoned to death. DNA links your child to the scene of the crime, and you want to downplay the DNA as if DNA was never even mentioned. You act like somebody said, oh, I saw him walk out the house with a knife and bloody clothes. Get serious. And even if somebody said they saw him, how would you even explain that? He doesn't know anybody over there at the house. He's not friends with anybody in Moscow, Idaho. He's not friends with the kids. He's not friends with any of the kids' friends or associates. So what the hell would he be doing over there? If somebody wanted to say they saw him come out bloody, go in. Oh, you've got the wrong person. Mistakes have been made in crimes naturally. In apprehension of a suspect, misidentification, falsely accusing someone, deliberately accusing someone. I don't think that bill fits this case. Because I got a funky feeling his DNA is in the blood with the victims and under the victim's fingernails. And you're not going to be able to explain that logically, he being a stranger to the victims. And I got a feeling this case is going to go kind of like this. Every time something is brought up in the courtroom pertaining to the victims and his own DNA, fibers, all of that, he's going to find a way to make up an excuse and nudge his lawyer. Well, tell him this part right here. Tell him this part right here. And that's all the lawyer is going to be doing inside of the courtroom is spinning more hypotheticals and narratives pertaining to the DNA. That's exactly what's going to happen in this trial. Every place DNA was found, they're going to try to dispute it and bring up a stupid narrative how his DNA got in that house and in with the victims. Blood, hair, so on and so forth. And it won't make no logical sense to even, to continue trying to refute it. But that is a defense attorney's job, is to try to get his or her client off. And we saw that with the Casey Anthony case. Perfect example of blatant evidence brought forward to the court. Scientists from the National Lab outside of Knoxville, Tennessee, appearing in court with the smell test of the trunk, all of that. And yet, oops, still ain't proved to us she killed her kid. Baby wrapped in her own damn blanket that matches her sheets at the house. Put in a canvas bag from another matching bag that matches two other bags in a garage from Target. Sticker on the duct tape, which was a sticker matching stickers in her house. But yet, you don't think this girl killed her kid. And to this day, nobody else has been arrested for the death of that baby. So who killed her then? That's my point. Better hope you get 12 sane people on this jury panel. Dear God, help us all.
Gillespie was in Monroe County, Pennsylvania for Kohberger's extradition hearing. She joins us now. Sierra, it's good to see you. This was a very quick hearing, but an important one.
Yeah, Jesse, this hearing was less than 30 minutes in all. But when Bryan Christopher Kohberger entered the courtroom, it was completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop. He came in wearing a red jumpsuit and handcuffs and avoided the gaze of the dozens of reporters that filled the courtroom and instead looked to the front row where 4 of his family members were seated. Kohberger's family, they were drawing a lot of attention to them because they had their hands on each other, kind of hugging each other. And one family member actually was so distraught and crying that a sheriff's deputy brought over a box of Kleenex to give to her to kind of calm herself down. But as far as Kohberger, he told the presiding judge here in Monroe County that he's waiving extradition. He's saying he's doing this without coercion, at his own volition, saying he believes that this is the right choice to head back to Idaho. Something to note here is that Kohberger stood for majority of this hearing. He seemed confident. He didn't quiver at all. His voice was very strong, and he responded to the judge as if he totally understood what she was saying. From here, though, we're expecting Kohberger to be taken back to Idaho within the next 10 days. And after his first initial appearance in Latah County, that's hopefully when a now sealed probable cause affidavit will be unsealed, and we'll learn more information about what led up to Kohberger's arrest and the murder investigation as a whole. Reporting live in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, Sierra Gillespie, Law and Crime Network.
Sarah, thank you. Great reporting as always. Correspondent Anjanette Levy hosted a Q&A session during the lunchtime
Janice,
hour.
be
They
nice.
had expert insight from experts to answer your questions about the Idaho murder investigation. And Joseph Scott Morgan, a forensic death investigator, says that the suspect's interest in criminology likely doesn't help him as much as people might think.
We've taken leaps and bounds. We've jumped ahead in the recovery of evidence.
At a Long Crime Daily, we check in with the DNA expert.
You're okay. That was just mean. Bring their own Kleenex. Lord have mercy.
But first, why did law enforcement arrest Bryan Kohberger?
Hit the link if you want to give your opinion pertaining to DNA ancestral match.
Officials wait for the suspect's extradition back to Idaho.
And did he plan to leave Pullman, Washington? Was he going to return after that trip from Pennsylvania? Please hit the link. Thank you for joining me. This is The Vault.
We hear a lot when we cover investigations, arrests, and trials. It's part of our Fourth Amendment right when it comes to searches and seizures. Now, we know that police have executed search warrants at Bryan Kohberger's apartment and office at the Washington State campus. And so far, there's been no update on the identification or location of a murder weapon. For now, the probable cause affidavit, which justifies Kohberger's arrest, will stay sealed.
A new stimulus program.
Brief intermission. Thank you for joining me. Gag order, sealed arrest record, DNA, what was left behind by the perpetrator. This perpetrator that didn't kill the kids, let's say. Jesus wept.
Justifies Kohberger's arrest will stay sealed, but once he's back in Idaho to face trial, the documents could be unsealed. So I want to bring in my co-host and public defender, Bryan Buckmeyer. You've dealt a lot with this, and it can get a little difficult because so much of it is really up to interpretation, right?
Jesse, up to interpretation is putting it mildly. You could probably put 10 defense attorneys in a room and get 10 different definitions of probable cause. But no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause. That's what the Fourth Amendment says about probable cause. And courts have tried to define it, but it is no actual universally accepted definition. Instead, courts give this flexible totality of the circumstances approach in defining what a reasonable and prudent person would believe a crime did, is, or will happen. That means what we may find in this case could be very broad in showing why Kohberger is believed to have committed these 4 murders and this burglary charge. But based on what we know so far, I'd expect the arrest warrant and the affidavit attached to be heavily reliant on the tracking of this white Elantra, the surveillance of Kohberger across the country. We would probably learn a lot about the cause of death from the victims and the DNA collected at the scene. DNA found at this scene could be skin cells, but I would bet that it's more likely than not blood, probably of the victims or probably on the victim, or close to where they were murdered, because don't forget, this is a party house. It will be hard for the investigators to differentiate other DNA from that of the suspect, so I think it's going to be close by to the victim.
So let's bring in former trial attorney and my co-host Terry Austin as well into the discussion. So Terry, it seems like all of the evidence so far is circumstantial. There's a lot we don't know. Is it too early to say that it's enough to secure a conviction?
Well, it sounds like there is quite a bit of that circumstantial evidence. Bryan was just talking about some of that. First of all, we have that car.
We have DNA. Those are two big pieces of evidence that the jury is going to take very seriously. And now we know they have traced him across the country. Where did he stop? What did he buy? What is that surveillance camera going to tell us across the country? So I think they have a lot of evidence, and I think the jury is going to think about it, even if there is no eyewitness. You know, remember, they're going to get a charge that says circumstantial evidence is just as good as direct evidence. And so if there's enough of that, which I think there will be, add on to all of that, you know, his credit card receipts, his phone data. There's plenty of evidence here. We've seen convictions on circumstantial evidence, and I think we'll see something here, and the community wants it.
Yeah, of course, and there's a lot that can happen between an affidavit and ultimately a trial, and I know that the police have asked for more information about Kohberger. Coming up on Law and Crime Daily, Kohberger has only two choices for a public defender in Idaho. We speak with the attorney for a victim's family about what's next for the suspect. Plus,
isn't that interesting? Only two public defenders. This has got to be a very small place. Wow, interesting. But this is America. America is built with small places, small jurisdictions. Every place is not like Chicago, New York, LA.
Idaho officials announced the arrest of suspect Bryan Kohberger on Friday, but behind the scenes, they identified him as a suspect more than a month ago through the use of DNA evidence. Law enforcement said genetic material found at the crime scene matched Kohberger's identity. Genealogy techniques were used to run the material through a public database to try to find potential family member matches. The recovered DNA, combined with other evidence, traced the genetic material back to Kohberger. The victims' families are working with law enforcement to find out how they may have known the suspect, if at all. But with no weapon in custody, what genetic material was actually recovered and from where? Well, we spoke with DNA expert Dr. Monty Miller to explore the possibilities.
They must have found some blood, a glove, a shirt, a hat. I mean, something, where they were confident that it was his DNA. Or maybe they found 3 or 4 things of interest and they ran them all through the database and they picked his out because they found somebody who lived close. I don't know. Police work, when it is something of that magnitude, a lot of people get involved. And the DNA gets run real quickly, and all ideas are explored almost simultaneously, which makes it nice. And that's why they were able to capture this guy. My guess is they already had a profile that they were looking for, and as soon as they got him, they stuck him into one of those machines and said, "Yeah, this is our guy." Because they don't want to create a media storm when they don't want to. They want to know in advance. So my guess is they've already done that, but I don't know that to be true.
Terry, it sure seems that authorities are using DNA to capture and convict suspects a lot more now, but does a DNA match guarantee a conviction?
No, it doesn't guarantee anything. I think we will continue to see an increased use of DNA testing, but that's to use the suspects to find them. But I don't think we're going to get all these convictions. Authorities have been using DNA, remember, since the late 1980s. The first use of DNA in court was actually against a guy named Tommy Andrews. He was accused of raping a woman at Knife Point during a burglary. That was in Florida. His DNA was collected from the crime scene, and he was sentenced to 22 years in prison. Now, of course, everybody remembers the O.J. Simpson case. Although there was clear DNA matches in the O.J. Simpson case, the defense argued that the DNA was mishandled, that it was contaminated during collection and processing, and it actually raised enough doubt that the jury ultimately found him not guilty. So DNA testing actually began only with blood samples. Today, as we heard from our expert, DNA testing methods has significantly improved, and DNA can be gathered from blood, skin, anything, hair, bones, saliva, semen. So, it's interesting, Jesse. One thing you have to think about is you can use DNA to convict, but you can also use DNA to prove that somebody's innocent.
That's a good point. Brian, you mentioned earlier that the DNA would likely be blood and not skin cells. Why do you say that? What does that tell us?
Yeah, it's the location that we're talking about. I've defended a lot of cases where they're in party houses or what you call a trap house where like drugs and guns are being used. And we have so many people coming in and out of a location, it's hard for an investigation to pinpoint who they're looking for. But if you have blood, especially in a brutal murder like this, where there's a high likely chance that the weapon might have slipped, nicked the suspect, his blood would have ended up there. Now you're not looking at a bottle with 4 or 5 people touching it and saying,
Exactly.
who's the person we're looking for?
Exactly.
Now you're looking for blood in an area that's not the victims, and that's a lot easier to pinpoint and say, all right, this is the person we need to go after. And like Dr. Miller said, they probably already had a profile. He's just someone they had to spot on and get once they got something else to compare to that DNA.
And also you have to imagine that if he didn't have a ready connection, that his DNA being in a place where he never been before raises different difficulties for the defense as well. And we told you earlier in the show that correspondent Anjanette Levy hosted a question and answer session during the lunchtime hour. And she got insight from experts to answer your questions about the Idaho murders investigation. So let's hear from Joseph Scott Morgan, forensic death investigator, because he told us while the alleged suspect was interested in criminology, that doesn't mean he's going to get away with anything.
There are people that are out there that are conflating the study of criminology with the study of forensic science, and nothing could be further from the truth. Yeah, we crossed paths with the.
Well, he obviously didn't. Study forensic science, or he wouldn't have got caught.
It doesn't make you an expert in crime scene investigation. As a matter of fact, he probably knows very little at all about the process of working a scene, and certainly processing the evidence and what we're specifically looking for when you get down into the details. And this case is all about details. And we're going to look in places that he probably thought about, but some places he didn't think about. And
all right, when we come back, there are 4 public defenders in Latah County, Idaho, and 2 of them have recused themselves. So who's left for Kohberger? An attorney for one of the victims' families has some answers.
All right, brief intermission. He's going to spin narratives. That's what he's going to do. What I just said. He's going to just make up stuff as the evidence is unfolding in court. He will get his lawyer to spin a narrative per evidence, because this is his crowning moment, his crowning glory, killing these kids and now going to court, getting his 5 minutes of fame. He's mentally gone. I don't care about him acting quiet, shy, nodding his head in court. Yes, sir, I'm not ill, blah, blah, blah. He's mentally gone. That's the reason why the kids are dead. And that's what he's going to do when he goes to court, until the wrong thing is said about him. And then that's when you'll probably see another side of Mr. Kohberger in court. Somebody will hit the right vein, believe me. Somebody will say something that'll hit a nerve. And then you'll see the real perpetrator for what he is.
Surprising new information Tuesday about legal representation in Idaho. The man accused of stabbing 4 college students to death says he needs a public defender, but there are only 4 in the county. The state of Idaho doesn't have a public defender system. Instead, 4 attorneys have contracted to help out. One of those is actually the coroner. While she didn't perform the autopsies on the victims, she does have inside knowledge about the reports and other information. So she's recused herself, as did another attorney in that office who works with the police. We learned during a Tuesday afternoon news conference that the chief public defender for another Idaho county was selected to represent Kohberger. Law and Crime spoke with Shannon Gray, the attorney for the attorney for the family of victim Kaylee Gonsalves, and he broke down what's next for Kohberger.
Everyone thinks that I think that he's going to get back here and he's going to automatically be arraigned on the case, and that's just not what's going to happen. His first appearance will probably be getting an attorney. So get either a court-appointed attorney, or if someone, if the family hires an attorney, a privately retained attorney, and then that attorney's going to want a couple of days to talk with his client, and then they'll have a preliminary hearing regarding the probable cause for the arrest, and then obviously the Latah County will have to get a grand jury for the indictment, and he can be arraigned on an information prior to the indictment and be held on that, and then. So, there's a lot of moving process things that are going on that aren't going to happen immediately.
Bryan, you're a public defender, and not having court-appointed counsel is a problem anywhere you look, but I think it's really compounded when there's such a small town experiences such a heinous and public crime, right?
Absolutely, Jesse. Justice, no matter how you look at it, will be delayed. Everyone in the United States has a right to counsel. If you can't afford one, a public defender will be given to you. When, how, and how well funded, though, really depends on where you're arrested. Back in 2015, Latah County, Idaho, considered getting a fourth public defender after the state was sued by the Idaho ACLU, and demands were made to make a centralized defender's office. But it doesn't seem like much has changed. That's probably why he's being represented by Ann Taylor, or reportedly so, by Ann Taylor, the chief public defender of Kootenai County. That's just 30 miles east of Spokane, Washington, on the border of Washington, Idaho, and about 100 miles north of Moscow, Idaho. This patchwork of having a public defender from another county stepping in to represent Kohberger will likely help to expedite the case in some way. But having a public defender who lives and works 100 miles away will create its own hurdles in the case, both for representation and expediting the case. But with the public's eye on the case, that may help the process be more efficient, but that's still going to be a long road to hoe.
Bryan makes some.
So, 2 public defenders on hand in this city, county. Who will represent him? Public defender, or will his parents hire a lawyer? A lawyer will be very expensive. I don't know if they have that kind of money to hire an attorney. And then you have to think he's a narcissist, so he will want to prolong and drag going to court out, plus appeals if indeed he's found guilty in a court of law by 12 members of a jury. Who's going to keep hiring a lawyer per appeals? Stay woke. And everybody knows that a lawyer won't automatically jump on an appeal if their client is found not guilty. They may pass the baton on to somebody else. I see him as that type of person. He's going to go into court, play crazy, play like he doesn't know what's going on. He didn't do it, And then let's say he's found guilty. He'll try to get an appeal and appeal and appeal. And next thing you know, it'll be years later. We'll still be talking about Bryan Kohberger going to court endlessly, such as the mess with Scott Peterson. It'll be the same. He won't accept that he fucked up. He made a mistake. He went in his car. He left behind DNA, possibly seen on foot going in, coming out. Left behind evidence at the scene. Left behind evidence in his car. Left behind evidence in his apartment. Possibly took trophies. Google searches, apps, things he said online, messaging people, stalking people. You can't erase any of that. So his mistake was, first, if indeed he stalked any female in that house or anywhere else, that was mistake number 1. Also, not getting any type of mental help for his anger issues and homicidal thoughts, rage. That's all on Bryan. He has nobody to blame but himself. And as I said, I believe the family knew he was not well. But in the end, he's an adult, almost 30 years of age. You can't make him see a counselor, nor could you make him take medicine. And that is the problem with trying to talk to adults who are mentally disturbed and on medicines. You cannot make them take medicine. We don't know if he was ever diagnosed with anything, if indeed medicine was rendered or offered or suggested. But in the end, you can't make him take medicine if indeed he was offered to take any type of psychotic medicines. Thank you for joining me.
Bryan makes some great points, Terry, but here's the problem. What happens if something happens to her? What happens if she can't represent him anymore? What if none of the other public defenders can take the case? What happens then?
Well, it's a really good question. What the courts are going to do is continue to look for other public defenders. But if they can't find a public defender in any county, in any surrounding county, what they're going to do is go to their list of private practitioners. And that could be someone who's solo, that could be someone out of a law firm. And remember, these people in law firms are looking for pro bono work. Some of the states require that you have a certain number of hours of pro bono work. So we have that. One thing I will say, if in fact they have to go to these private attorneys, whether it's solo, whether it's a large firm, I think these people are going to hesitate a little bit because they may be criticized for taking the case.
Yes, they will. People will criticize them.
They could also be criticized because it's such a heinous crime. So if you have to go public or private, it's probably better to go with a public defender who is accustomed to taking the abuse when you have a case like this.
Well, let me.
Very interesting.
Bryan, I'm going to throw this to you real quick, 30 seconds. What's the first conversation that the attorney has with Bryan Kohberger? Did you do it? I mean, what's the conversation like?
So a lot of public defenders vary on that as to whether or not they want to know if their client committed the crime. The first thing you want to do is create a relationship with your client. They're the best source of information. Really, you're just going over the affidavit, giving them information and telling them how you're going to represent them, and then tell them you're going to take a lot of abuse because you're a public defender, as Terry said.
Yeah, well, and not only a public defender in such a high-profile case where there are so many people who don't want to hear about Kohberger's defenses or Kohberger's rights.
Exactly, nobody. That's true.
Everybody here on a legal show, everybody is entitled to the same rights, and he is innocent until proven guilty. We're at the beginning stages of this investigation in this case, and we'll see where it goes. Bryan, Terry, great job as always. Thanks so much. Everyone, thanks so much for joining.
Law and Crime Network. If you need verification, it's in the YouTube queue, and I can post this as well to my community page. I'm going to end this stream here shortly. I'm 1 hour and 50 minutes in. Thank you for your time. What DNA was left behind? The point is, DNA has linked them to the crime. I'm not here to argue DNA with anybody. If somebody wants to believe their child or friend, family didn't commit the crime, that is his or her opinion. Yes, he is presumed innocent. But the DNA has already been mentioned. It's not like they went and knocked on somebody's door, arrested him. You'd have to have a cause even for the arrest. A judge has to sign the warrant. See, these are stair steps that people tend not to address, because if you don't know the law, then you just say anything. You can't just go get a warrant for somebody's arrest. There are protocols, there are steps. So somebody had to gather evidence, number one. Someone had to take the evidence to the district attorney's office. He or she had to sign off on the evidence. And then it goes from there. So it's not like somebody just went to a crime scene, found 4 dead people, and just looked in a telephone book like the crazy TikToker did that professor and say, oh, I think this guy here did it, such as what the internet junkies were doing, wannabe armchair sleuths, picking out random people associated with the victims to say they are the killers. And I'd like to know how some of you all are feeling with all that lovely content you had, saying that this Jack did it. Now we have somebody that's 15 minutes away in an entirely different state as the suspect. So much for Jacks of all trades as the perpetrator. Change the narrative every damn week. And as I said in my commentary earlier, a Jack being a suspect is not the same as a Jack leaving DNA. So obviously a Jack didn't leave a DNA, but a Bryan Kohberger did. End of discussion. Prayers to the family, all family members, friends, community. Praying for the safety of the children going to school in Washington State, Idaho University, University of Idaho, and all its entities and other schools around the nation. Prayers for everyone's safety, because as someone said in a commentary pertaining to John Wayne Gacy, you have to be worried about the Gacys of the world, just like you have to be worried about leery of the Bryans of the world, because he's not the first and he won't be the last. And whether you want to deem him a mass murderer, serial killer, whichsoever, he still snuffed out 4 individuals that I do not believe he knew from a can of paint, and he took advantage of the situation. Sadly, he went into these people's home and he killed them, killed their guest, Mr. Ethan Chapin. So in the end, it doesn't matter who the target was. That's just something to put on a sheet of paper. But it's not going to bring the kids back because this one was a target, that one was a target. He was mad, he's an incel. They're dead. They're not coming back. And the more you focus on the target, the more people's minds start to race. Why my child? Why you choose my child? Why did he choose my child if she or he wasn't the target? See, that's when it gets out of control. And naturally, these people are going to question why their child was chosen. But that's the whole point of the story. Why should it be anyone's child? Why should it be anyone murdered? It shouldn't. But when you're dealing with a diabolical mind, he or she doesn't care. So if it wasn't going to be the Idaho 4 on that fateful morning, it was going to be somebody. And that's what people can't comprehend. These people were just collateral damage, even if one was the target. He did not care. That's why he killed them. He has no regard for life. So it's amazing he could stand in court and look possibly sad seeing his mother and sister cry, but he had no regard for those kids who were crying out while he was brutally stabbing them to death. You see, the act is self-serving. He got something out of killing them, hunting them. But yet he stands in court and only feels emotion for watching his mom and sister cry. So you try to understand the two separate emotions. One over here, he has no regard. Over here, he's feeling sorry for his family. But yet he didn't care about putting his name out there in the limelight as being a killer, alleged killer. He cares for no one. And I tell people that all the time. You hear a lot of narcissists say, I care for her, but I don't care for this one. No, you don't care for anyone. No way you can say you care about humans and you would bludgeon to death for no damn reason, but you care about your mom or your sister or your dad or your grandmother. It's ridiculous. Fake ideology. Fake emotions. Because we know that if they were to do or say anything that would tick you off, they will possibly be victim number 5, 6, or 7. Stay woke. Later today, I'd like to bring you commentary pertaining to Miss Dirty Roberta Laundrie and this shovel commentary. It came to my attention yesterday that now the allegation is that she made the comment before the death of Gabby Petito. So one can say, well, Roberta, it still sounds bad because one, the girl is dead. She used to live in your house. She dated your son. Your son killed her, confessed, wrote it in a notebook, killed himself in a swamp. And you got the nerve to say, what? Oh, I said it before she died. So that means your son had to have been talking badly about Gabby Petito allegedly for you to allegedly say, I'll bring a shovel. So that means he had to have been talking about her beforehand to you killing the girl. Now, ask yourself, does this conversation make any damn sense? Oh, no, I wasn't going to take no shovel to help him bury her, but I mentioned it before he killed her. So in what context would that have been? Do you see how sick people are? This is why their children are sick. This is why Bryan Laundrie is dead. He killed himself because he killed someone. No regard for life. No empathy. Now we got people over here coddling a grown-ass 28-year-old who bludgeoned 4 kids to death. Giving a half-baked ass condolences letter to these families, but also enabling their child and rooting for their innocence. Yet DNA has been introduced as a part of the damn arrest. You see, these kids, these people are products of their parents. And when their kids come up for arrest, suspicion of murder, or a person missing, their commentary shows you why the child behaves the way they behave, because they got it from their parents. And I got a funky feeling we're probably going to hear a whole lot of stuff about Bryan Kohberger and his relationship with his parents. We're going to hear a lot of things that's probably very negative about his parents. Just wait. I got a feeling it's a whole lot of something that ain't too good between those parents. A father that's not in contact with other relatives for whatever reason, difficult, raised a difficult son, awkward son who is now a suspect in a quadruple homicide. So we have to ask ourselves, who's the father? How did he treat his kids? How did he treat his wife? How is he currently treating his wife and children, other people, co-workers, jobs, all of that? How is he as a neighbor? I got a feeling a whole lot of stuff's going to come out. And it's going to paint the picture of why Bryan Kohberger is the way he is. Because he's a product of his mom and dad, naturally. One moment, please. All right, everybody. Thank you for joining me. I will get back with you guys later. Like, share, subscribe. If you'd like to donate, $BeganG129 Cash App. You have been listening to The Vault. Thank you so very much. Talk to you guys later.